Welcome to Tradespotting. Proponents of shorting, whether they know it or not, believe in Eugene Fama's efficient market hypothesis, which says market crashes are healthy and indeed necessary. Since the 1960s and 70s, these Chicago boys, driven by self-serving profit values, have been advocating for and implementing extreme economic measures in countries and governments across the world. But the fight back has started. Knowledge is lighting up this dark age of macroeconomics. Good people are asking themselves again, as Adam Smith, the creator of capitalism, once did, for one man to be rich, do 10 others have to be poor? Today, we are really lucky to have Josh Hamilton on the show to talk about his book and his story, To the Moon, the Gamestop Saga. Josh, let's jump right in. Do you consider yourself a revolutionary?
That is a really difficult question. I both consider myself to want the current system to be very heavily reformed, but I don't want a revolution because revolutions get messy. They get hijacked by sometimes the worst people imaginable. And I think this is an argument that I have with a lot of left-wingers, especially that I'm friends with and that I interview, is that they always go straight for capitalism is the problem. We need a revolution to destroy or get rid of capitalism. And I'm like, I don't think that's the right way to go, because capitalism is the thing that gave us all the amazing tech that we are sitting talking on Zoom here. And I've got my 50 quid HD camera. There's so many amazing things that capitalism has given us. That doesn't mean that the system hasn't become horrendously corrupted and that we're probably heading for some sort of revolution. But I would like us to be able to do that without all the violence and the beheading maybe and the destruction of property, and because once things turn chaotic, you never know what's going to come out the other side. And I quite like most of the system we have. It just, I think, needs refreshing and renewing.
That's a really good way of putting it. People do talk about the Velvet Revolution and these ideas of bloodless change in that way, and something that's more on that nature, some sort of friendly banana revolution, perhaps. So tell me about your story, Josh. When was this desire to help and enlighten others born in you, and what do you enjoy most about this journey to the moon?
So I started the podcast 3.5 years ago and kind of did it on and off between ski seasons. And then, when the pandemic hit and there was no work, obviously I started doing a lot more of it. And then when the GameStop thing sort of slid into my Reddit feed, I started, first looking at the amazing memes that drew me in, and then started to educate myself a bit more. And then my go-to, anytime I'm really struggling to understand something or I want to talk with someone about something, is to try and get someone on my podcast about it. So I ended up getting a couple of people, and the interviews really blew up, which was awesome for me and for all the people who got to watch them, because some of the guests I had on, I think, were really really useful for the community to help understand what was going on. So it was more of a case of I took the thing I already had and tried to turn it into a way to help educate other apes basically about what was going on. But I'm also trying to avoid that becoming the full focus of it, because I want the podcast to continue after this is finished. So I'm cautious to not go too hard on the GameStop stuff. And I've noticed quite a few YouTubers and influencers have just gone especially for AMC, actually, have just gone hell for leather. That's the end of everything else that they'd ever covered.
Yeah, I think they're presenting themselves with an existential cul-de-sac in some senses. So you touched on your interviews you've done, the podcasts, and they were really, really helpful. I found your interview with Houston Wade. I mean, that came across so many of my social networks. We don't really have, despite being such a great wealth of knowledge and such an excellent resource in subreddits, we don't necessarily have only one place to find out about this stuff. And that flow of information coming from so many different places means that so many different subcultures or communities or just groups of people find out about it. I mean, I joke about it every so often, but I've shared good videos such as that one with yourself in my neighborhood WhatsApp group. You know, everybody knows about this sort of thing now. So tell me, in your book, Brexit: The Establishment of Civil War, you touch on the past use of disasters to lead the public into accepting extreme economic liberalization. Do you believe, Josh, that there is a link between the GameStop saga and the neoliberal politics that have gripped the main parties here in the UK and in the US?
Well, I mean, I guess the best link that I could sort of try and articulate is the fact that the ideology that's pushed by like neoliberalism as such, like it's such an overused term as well, which makes it difficult to talk about. But essentially, like this ideology of deregulation, lower taxes for the rich and powerful, and cuts to state spending on welfare or state assets. That sort of, yeah, those 4 points tend to be the dominant ideology, not just in say the two main parties in Britain or America, but across most of the developed world and in most of like the big institutions as well, like everything right up to the World Bank and the IMF. And now I can't take credit for laying out that theory of shocks and disaster capitalism being used to push through these policies. It's Naomi Klein's work. Like she's just her book, The Shock Doctrine, especially, is just like a stunning expose of how this ideology has like spread out from the Chicago School of Economics and basically taken over most of the world. It was prevalent in post-Soviet Russia, in like post 9/11 America, in Britain, I believe, in 3 waves since Thatcher. It's taken over Latin America, Asia. Just the entire world has basically been consumed little bit by this ideology that says, you know, we have to take these really unpopular policies, and then the only way we're going to get them through is by exploiting disaster, whether that's civil war, whether that's a financial crash, whether that's a natural disaster in the case of things like Hurricane Katrina. And essentially, like the ideology that persists there is that like deregulation, cuts, and obscene amounts of wealth accumulating in the hands of a smaller and smaller group of people is not a bad thing, and that's ultimately the goal. And that is the ideology that kind of pervades Wall Street and is the reason that they continue to get away with all of the most horrendous, fraudulent, and corrupt practices that you can imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because there's no convincing us that that's the right thing to do, but it does seem possible to convince those in positions of power. How that is, I'm not quite sure, but it does.
I mean,
seem
they stand to benefit
trend.
from it.
Yeah, they do, don't they? And they don't ever seem to pay the price either, unfortunately.
No.
Something that's pissed me off for a while is those people on Wall Street. I come from that world, but I was never born in it. This idea that you have in these conversations that persist in these type of communities and in most of the financial world is this idea of the greatest transfer of wealth in history will come, and it's referencing our parents' deaths. There seems to be an institutional vacuum cleaner plugged in and ready to suck up all of that wealth in a slot that might otherwise be reserved for an oxygen tank or a defibrillator. You and I are of the same generation, Josh. We're in many ways nature's reaction to the bastards that run the world. Do you believe our story is one of economic apocalypse? or is it a rebirth of fairness and focusing on the good of the many rather than, as you say, the few?
I think that there is definitely some sort of monster crash on the horizon. When exactly that arrives, I'm not sure, but everything I see is just constantly like, oh, look at this warning sign that was flashing right before 2008. Well, it's 5 times worse now. Like I keep seeing that everywhere. It's like debt levels, like consumer debt, banking debt. There's like the reverse repo markets. There's like bond prices. Like everything is just going. Like people like watch out. There's a crash coming. And then like the biggest signal of all is Jim Cramer being like, no, everything's fine. Because he's always right.
Yeah, Jim Cramer, best counter indicator there is. Yeah, that what you touch on there is this insidious, nebulous nature of the evil we fight. And Josh, you're an inspiration, I think, to a lot of people who might otherwise feel though that the world is too chock-a-block, it's too busy, there's too many people, there isn't enough opportunity, there isn't any social mobility, there's no chance to make a difference to the environment they live in. They can't create for themselves the lives that they were naturally born to live. And I feel that this is a particular problem that's happening and has led to huge mental health problems in our communities and countries. What would your advice be? This is just off the cuff, although it's not trivial at all, but a very serious question. What advice would you have for young people nowadays who perhaps feel like there is just too much of this going on and that they themselves are impotent to do anything about it?
I mean, you're definitely right. There is an outrageous amount going on. There's a great quote from Brett Weinstein, actually. He says, no matter how cynical I get, it turns out I'm still naive, which is just brilliant. And that's how I feel like looking at some stuff sometimes. I'm like, especially with the financial markets and the kind of learning curve I've been on for the last 6 months, because like in January, I had no idea like about most of the financial terms and things that I've been forced to educate myself on since then. But I don't know, I guess I like to think that although there is a lot of corruption and the world has become incredibly difficult to achieve, like social mobility is very difficult to get from zero, like beyond that first rung of the ladder. But 2 things that I like to think keep me, I don't know, pushing forwards is like, I refuse to not be the master of my own destiny. As much as of a wanker as that makes me sound, I like to think it's like, look, it's in my hands. Like I will be able to do something, and I feel like if you're defeated before you start, you've no chance. And the other thing is just that there's a great quote from Cal Newport, which I can't remember the exact words, but I'll paraphrase it. It's basically that in a world where everything is like degrading and things, it's so difficult to stand out because everybody's at the same point, when people are like wasting so much time, like just sitting scrolling Instagram or TikTok or making their stupid dances, like it doesn't take very much to be exceptional. And I like to look at it that way. Is like all you have to do is like take those first few steps and you're already miles ahead of most people. So those are the 2 things that I like to keep in mind, at least anyway.
It's a brilliant message, Josh, and you're living the lesson for others, I think. In that sense, and you're with this book you're writing, you're I feel it to be helping other people. And how can I and other people watching along help you in that pursuit? How can we help you, Josh?
We could pre-order the book. That would be awesome. You can go to whenmoon.com. So when, W-E-N, spelled correctly, obviously, -moon.com, and check out like my story of why I wrote it. or why I'm writing it, and some of the interviews I've done about it. And yeah, you can get yeah, I'm still dying after my festival the weekend. You can get a free pack of crayons and 2 tickets to the moon if you're one of the first 200 people to order it. But there's some other cool perks in there, like you can I'm gonna have a chapter for people to leave messages to Wall Street or whoever they want, and I'll get acknowledgements for all the people who back me. And there's some cool hoodies and stuff that have been made by the Stonk News Network that we're offering as perks as well. So yeah, if you want to do that, you can pre-order the book or just subscribe to me on YouTube, because that's always good.
That is a definite, yeah, everyone should definitely subscribe to Josh on YouTube. I really love the message that you're putting out there, and all those things that you get along with it are a bonus. The main thing for me is how you're able to articulate the message and how important that trenchant communication is in this war we're having, to fight against the propaganda that otherwise would lead to FUD and people not sticking to their own conviction. So I'd really like to support that, and if it's okay with you, I'd happily get 10 copies of your book for the first 10 comments on the video. And for anybody who wants to put in any message on the first 10 comments, you'll each get a copy, if that's okay with you, Josh.
Yeah, man, go for it.
Okay, awesome. Right, so yes, so to end maybe, Josh, and my final question then it would be, do you believe this economic emancipation will lead to fairer markets? Or are we being framed for an economic disaster? Will we really see these fairer markets, or will it just be used to usher in more profit-driven governance via this disaster capitalism complex?
So one of the problems that like my friend and I talk a lot about in not just like the financial world or politics is in most of the way that our entire society runs at the minute, is that we used to have this process where we like start something, then maybe you'd have like a problem arise, then we like assess what that was, and we'd learn from the problem and make tweaks to the system. Like that's how it's meant to work. And whatever's happened in like the last 20 years, maybe it's like the 24-hour news cycle, maybe it's social media, maybe it's the internet, we seem to go like problem, or we start something, we have a problem, and then nothing. That's it. Like the problem just continues or gets worse sometimes. And the one thing I will say about this situation that I think is seeming to be a little different is that Gary Gensler, especially from what he was when he did his interview there on CNBC, they removed the interview from their YouTube channel, which is like the most hilarious and unsubtle thing ever. I find you can learn a lot from what gets censored and what is like gets responded with silence, or what gets ignored, just as much as you can from what gets said. And the fact that they removed what he was saying about the Redditors not doing anything wrong, and B, about his desire to look into dark pools and the GameStop thing dominating like quite a lot of their time at the minute. And then they removed it, and then he tweeted freaking video. Like, what a hero. Which kind of makes me hopeful, especially when you combine that with all the sort of new rules that the DTCC have been putting in place and the NSCC. It just suggests that there are changes already being made, and I guess we kind of have to wait to see how apocalyptic the meltdown is, to see what happens in response to it, because every other crisis before 2008 had been met with huge reforms, but 2008 wasn't, and that's probably the reason we're back in like a really, really sort of perilous situation for the financial markets, at least anyway. But it looks like perhaps we're going to see some sort of change, and you kind of mentioned the big upward or downward transfer of wealth earlier. We have, over the past 18 months, seen the biggest upward transfer of wealth in human history. And I hope that that's going to now be followed by the greatest downward transfer of wealth in human history. So fingers crossed.
Well, that is a brilliant message to end it on, Josh. On that bombshell, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on the show. You are, I would stand shoulder to shoulder with you in any battle, Josh, and be proud to fight beside you. Thank you so much for coming on. It's a pleasure to meet you, and hopefully we've ended it with people wanting more, and they'll be able to look you up, find your YouTube, and get so much more of this information. And if they like, comment down below, get a copy of that book and look it up for yourself. It's going to be a good read. Thank you very much, Josh.
Not a problem. Thanks, man.
Bring on the prices roll.